11 feet of shimmering silver muscle and raw regal power stared down at the lone human standing in the center of her throne room. The Empress Vera Thalor leaned forward on her crystal throne, her deep crimson eyes narrowing with open amusement. Then she spoke, her voice rolling like distant thunder across the vast hall, lined with towering nobles and generals. "Why are you so small, human?" The question hung in the air for half a second before the entire court erupted in roaring laughter. The sound crashed against the towering walls like a wave, echoing off murals of ancient Thalorian victories. Ryan Brooks, 35 years old, structural engineer from Earth, stood perfectly still in his simple diplomatic uniform. He barely reached the chest of the smallest guard in the room. To these giants, he looked fragile, almost comical. Yet his steady gaze never wavered. Back on Earth, he had spent years building orbital platforms under crushing deadlines and zero-gravity hazards. Size had never stopped him before, and it would not stop him now. The Empress raised one massive hand, silencing the laughter with a single gesture. "The galaxy teeters on the edge of war," she continued, her tone shifting from mockery to cold calculation. "The void swarms devour entire planets without mercy. They adapt. They multiply. My empire needs allies, but when I look at you, human, I see only weakness. Tell me, why should I waste a single soldier protecting your tiny world?" Ryan took a slow, deliberate breath. The gravity on Thalor Prime pressed a little heavier on his shoulders than Earth's, but he had already adjusted. "Your Majesty," he replied in a calm, clear voice that carried through the silent hall, "our size has never defined us. We have survived where larger species fell. We build from small beginnings. We endure. And we fight smarter, not harder. Humanity brings more than muscle to this fight. We bring ingenuity, and the will to keep standing when everything else breaks." A few nobles exchanged uneasy glances. The Empress studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she waved her hand again. "Bold words for one so diminutive. We shall see if your kind can back them up." The next several days passed in a blur of oversized corridors and polite dismissals. Ryan was given quarters that felt like caverns, ceilings so high he could have stacked 3 beds and still not touched the top. He observed Imperial Guard drills from the sidelines, noting their flawless formations and overwhelming physical power. Occasionally, he offered quiet suggestions about endurance-based tactics and clever positioning. Most instructors responded with polite nods and hidden smiles. Then, one quiet afternoon, Ryan took a less-traveled service corridor to deliver a routine report. He found a group of lower-caste workers struggling with a jammed energy relay wedged deep inside a narrow maintenance shaft. The massive Thalorians could not reach it without tearing out half the wall. Tools clattered in frustration. Without a word, Ryan rolled up his sleeves. "Let me try." His smaller frame slipped easily into the tight space. Trained hands moved with precision, fingers finding the fault in under 2 minutes. A few deft reroutes, a quick recalibration, and the relay hummed back to life with a satisfying thrum. He emerged covered in a light layer of dust, wiping his hands on his uniform. The workers stared in open surprise. One of them, voice thick with genuine respect, said, "You fixed it where we could not even reach. Thank you." Ryan offered a small smile. "Sometimes the smallest tool fits the tightest spot. Glad I could help." Word of the incident spread quietly through the palace staff, like ripples on still water. Servants and technicians began speaking of the human in hushed, curious tones. For the first time, some eyes lingered on him with something other than amusement. Yet the nobles at formal dinners still treated him like an exotic pet. Subtle jabs continued. The Empress watched these exchanges from her high seat, her crimson eyes resting on Ryan longer each time. She summoned him for private audiences, asking sharp questions about human history, our wars, and how a single fragile planet had reached the stars. Ryan answered honestly every time. He spoke of turning limitations into advantages, of fighting smarter, of a spirit that refused to break no matter the odds. The Empress listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from guarded curiosity to something deeper, something almost thoughtful. Evenings in his quarters, Ryan would review diplomatic notes and send secure updates back to Earth. He thought of his family in Texas, the friends who had urged him to represent humanity with quiet dignity. Being underestimated was nothing new, but here, under the gaze of an empire that measured worth in sheer physical size, every small victory carried the weight of his entire species. He knew the void swarms were drawing closer. Reports from the frontier grew darker each day. The real test was coming, and it would not be decided in polite conversations or quiet repairs in maintenance shafts. It would be decided when the swarms finally broke through, and when the Empire discovered exactly what one small human could do when everything was on the line. Ryan Brooks carried himself with the steady confidence of a man who had learned long ago that true power often hid in places no one thought to look. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a quiet voice reminded him, the galaxy was about to learn the same lesson. The training grounds of the Imperial Palace stretched across acres of carefully engineered terrain, designed to simulate every battlefield condition the Thalorian Empire might ever face. Ryan Brooks stood at the edge of the observation platform, his smaller stature making him nearly invisible among the cluster of high-ranking officers watching the daily combat drills. The air carried the sharp tang of ozone from energy weapons and the heavy thud of massive boots striking the ground. Empress Thalor observed from her elevated dais, her crimson eyes scanning the warriors below with practiced authority. Today's session featured her personal champion, Korath, a towering figure whose reputation for unmatched strength had earned him the title of undefeated in over 100 formal duels. Korath moved with the fluid power of a predator, his silver skin rippling with muscles that could crush stone. The soldiers formed a wide circle, cheering as he shattered reinforced practice dummies with single devastating blows. Ryan watched quietly, analyzing every movement. Human training had taught him that raw power was only one part of victory. Timing, leverage, and adaptability often decided the outcome when facing a much larger opponent. One of the generals noticed Ryan's focused attention and let out a low chuckle. "Do you find our methods amusing, little human? Perhaps you believe your kind could stand against a true Thalorian warrior?" The question drew scattered laughter from the group. Ryan met the general's gaze steadily. "I believe every species has its own way of fighting, sir. Strength takes many forms." His calm reply quieted the chuckles for a moment, though the dismissive glances remained. Empress Vera leaned forward slightly on her dais, her expression unreadable as she studied the exchange. As the drills continued, a sudden malfunction occurred in one of the heavy gravity simulators. The device, meant to test endurance under increased pressure, spiked dangerously. Several soldiers were pinned to the ground under intense force. Technicians shouted in alarm, unable to reach the control panel quickly enough because of the shifting terrain. Without waiting for permission, Ryan sprinted forward. His lighter body allowed him to move through the fluctuating gravity pockets where the massive Thalorians struggled. He reached the panel in seconds, fingers flying over the unfamiliar controls as he recalled the schematics he had studied during his first week. With a precise sequence of overrides, he brought the simulator back to safe levels. The pinned soldiers rose shakily, breathing hard, staring at the human who had moved so swiftly where they could not. Korath himself stepped closer, towering over Ryan by more than 6 feet. "You act without fear," the champion rumbled, his voice carrying genuine surprise. "Most outsiders would have stayed back." Ryan wiped sweat from his brow and shrugged lightly. "Fear doesn't fix problems, action does." Word of the rescue spread rapidly through the palace that evening. Servants and lower-ranking guards began speaking of the human in tones that mixed curiosity with growing respect. During meals and briefings, the open mockery lessened. Some officers now asked thoughtful questions about human engineering techniques and survival strategies from Earth's harsh history. The Empress summoned Ryan again that night for a private discussion in her personal gardens, a vast space filled with bioluminescent plants that cast soft, shifting lights across the pathways. She walked slowly beside him, shortening her long strides out of courtesy. "You continue to surprise me, Ryan Brooks," she said, her voice softer than in the throne room. "You do not demand respect, you simply earn it through deeds." Ryan glanced up at her towering form, choosing his words carefully. "Respect given freely means more than respect demanded, Your Majesty. My people have learned that lesson many times." They spoke for nearly an hour about the coming threats from the outer void. The Empress shared her concerns that her warriors had grown too reliant on their physical superiority. Ryan described how humans had repeatedly turned near defeat into victory through adaptation and innovation under pressure. As they walked, he felt the first real connection forming, a bridge built on mutual understanding rather than mere political necessity. Back in his quarters later that night, Ryan reviewed the day's events and prepared a detailed report for Earth Command. The heavier gravity still pressed on his muscles, but he had begun a quiet routine of exercises, pushing his body to adapt further. Each small improvement reminded him why he had accepted this mission, to prove that humanity's place in the galaxy was earned, not granted out of pity. Over the following days, the court's attitude continued to shift in subtle ways. During strategy sessions, Ryan's suggestions about defensive positioning and resource allocation were no longer immediately dismissed. A few younger officers even sought him out privately to learn more about human hand-to-hand techniques, intrigued by stories of smaller fighters overcoming larger foes through skill and determination. Korath watched these interactions with growing interest, though he maintained his aloof demeanor. Ryan sensed an undercurrent of challenge building, but he remained focused on his role as observer and advisor. He knew that true tests rarely announced themselves politely. One evening, while assisting with the calibration of a new defense array, Ryan found himself alone with the Empress once more. She asked him directly about the limits of human endurance. He answered honestly, describing battles where soldiers had held lines against impossible odds through sheer willpower and clever tactics. Her crimson eyes held his for a long moment. "Perhaps one day we shall see if your words hold truth in action, not merely in stories." The palace continued its daily rhythm, but beneath the surface, tensions were rising. Reports from the frontier grew more alarming. The outer void swarms were drawing closer, testing Imperial defenses in ways that exposed cracks in their traditional reliance on brute strength. Ryan continued his quiet work, making himself useful wherever he could, all while preparing mentally for whatever challenge might come next. He had come to this empire as a small representative of a small world, but every day he felt the quiet strength of humanity growing in the eyes of those around him. The moment when that strength would be truly tested was approaching faster than anyone realized, and when it arrived, it would force the entire Thalorian Empire to reconsider everything it believed about power and worth. For now, Ryan simply carried on with steady resolve, knowing that every small act of competence was planting seeds that might one day grow into something far greater. The Imperial Arena stood as a colossal monument to Thalorian martial tradition. Its tiered seating rose in concentric circles that could hold thousands of spectators under the planet's dual suns. Today, the stands were packed with nobles, military leaders, and elite warriors, all gathered for the annual demonstration of Imperial might. Ryan Brooks sat in the designated observer section, his seat specially adjusted to accommodate his smaller frame among the massive Thalorian furniture. The air buzzed with anticipation as Empress Thalor entered her royal box. Her presence commanded instant silence across the vast space. Trumpets sounded in deep, resonant tones, signaling the start of the main event. The champion Korath emerged from the warrior's gate, his silver skin gleaming under the bright lights, muscles rippling with every deliberate step. He carried no weapons for this display, relying instead on his legendary barehanded combat prowess. The crowd roared in approval as he raised his massive fists in salute to the Empress. Ryan watched with focused attention, analyzing every movement, every shift of weight, and every subtle tell in the champion's posture. Human martial traditions had taught him the value of patience and observation, skills honed through years of training where size was never an excuse for defeat. A herald stepped forward and announced the traditional challenge. Any warrior brave enough could face the champion in honorable combat. Several Thalorian soldiers stepped into the arena, only to be dispatched with swift, overwhelming force that left the audience cheering wildly. Each victory reinforced the Empire's belief in the superiority of raw, physical power. Then one of the generals leaned toward Ryan with a mocking grin. Would the small human care to test his theories against true strength, or do your kind prefer to hide behind clever words? The taunt drew laughter from nearby nobles. Ryan felt the eyes of the Empress upon him. She had not spoken, yet her crimson gaze held a quiet expectation. Ryan stood slowly, his heart steady despite the surge of adrenaline. If it would serve to demonstrate the potential of alliance, Your Majesty, I accept the challenge. A stunned silence fell over the arena, quickly replaced by murmurs of disbelief and open amusement. The Empress raised her hand, quieting the crowd. Very well, human, you may face my champion, but know that this is no mere exhibition. Honor demands a true contest. Korath turned toward Ryan, his expression shifting from boredom to genuine surprise. The size difference was absurd. The human barely reached the champion's chest. Yet Ryan walked calmly into the center of the arena, rolling his shoulders and settling into a balanced stance that looked almost relaxed. The crowd's laughter grew louder. Bets were placed openly on how many seconds the small outsider would last. The signal sounded. Korath lunged forward with terrifying speed, his massive fist swinging in a blow that could shatter stone. Ryan moved at the last instant, slipping inside the arc of the attack with practiced precision. Instead of retreating, he used the champion's own momentum against him, driving a sharp elbow strike into a vulnerable nerve cluster just below the armpit. Korath grunted in pain. The sound shocked the audience into sudden quiet. The champion spun, attempting to grab Ryan with both hands. Ryan ducked low and swept a leg behind the larger opponent's knee, using leverage and timing rather than strength. Korath stumbled, his balance disrupted for the first time in memory. Ryan pressed the advantage without hesitation, delivering a series of rapid strikes to joints and pressure points that human anatomy studies had long identified as universal weaknesses across many bipedal species. Each blow was calculated, not wild, turning the champion's size into a liability by forcing him to overcommit. The arena fell into stunned silence as the fight continued. Korath roared and attempted a crushing bear hug. Ryan twisted free at the last moment, using the brief opening to land a powerful palm strike to the solar plexus that drove the air from the champion's lungs. The massive warrior dropped to one knee, gasping, while Ryan stepped back, breathing hard but still standing. The Empress rose from her seat, her crimson eyes wide with disbelief. The entire court stared in absolute shock as their undefeated champion struggled to regain his feet. Ryan offered no taunts, no celebration. He simply stood ready, waiting for the next move with calm focus. Korath finally pushed himself upright, respect now clear in his expression. "You fight like no one I have ever faced," he admitted, his voice carrying across the silent arena. "Small, yet unbreakable." Before the champion could continue, a new alarm blared across the palace complex, cutting through the moment like a blade. Emergency lights flashed as urgent reports flooded in from the frontier. The outer void swarms had launched a surprise assault on a key defensive outpost, breaching the outer perimeter faster than any prediction. The demonstration was forgotten instantly. Warriors rushed to their stations. The Empress issued rapid commands, mobilizing forces while Ryan remained in the arena, his mind already shifting to the larger threat. As chaos erupted around him, he felt a new weight settle on his shoulders. The brief victory against the champion had shattered long-held assumptions, but the real test was only beginning. Soldiers who had laughed at him earlier now looked at him with open curiosity and a hint of urgency. The Empress caught his eye across the distance and gave a single, deliberate nod of acknowledgement. Ryan returned the gesture, understanding that the path to true alliance had just opened wider. In the hours that followed, as preparations for deployment accelerated, Ryan found himself pulled into strategy meetings where his input was no longer dismissed. He shared ideas about adaptive defense formations and rapid response tactics that humans had perfected against superior numbers. Officers listened now, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. Word of the arena confrontation spread like wildfire through the ranks, transforming Ryan from a curious novelty into a symbol of unexpected potential. Yet he remained grounded, focusing on the immediate crisis rather than personal glory. The palace buzzed with activity late into the night, with warriors arming themselves and ships being readied for immediate departure. Ryan worked alongside them, modifying equipment where his smaller hands could reach delicate components that larger fingers struggled with. Each small contribution added to the growing respect. As the first transport ships lifted off toward the threatened frontier, Ryan boarded one of the vessels, knowing that the coming battle would demand everything humanity had to offer. The Empress watched the departure from her tower, her thoughts clearly turning over the events of the day. The small human had done what no Thalorian had managed in years. He had defeated her champion not through size or brute force, but through skill, timing, and unyielding determination. That single contest had planted seeds of doubt about long-held beliefs and opened doors to new possibilities. The real war, however, was still ahead, and Ryan Brooks would soon face challenges far greater than any arena duel. For the first time, the Empire began to wonder whether the so-called small humans might hold the key to survival against the devouring swarms from the void. The journey to the front lines had begun. The frontier outpost on Thalor's outer rim burned under the relentless assault of the void swarms. A tide of chitinous creatures poured from ruptured space in waves of pure hunger. Ryan Brooks stood shoulder to shoulder with Thalorian defenders on the shattered ramparts, the acrid smoke stinging his eyes as energy weapons screamed overhead. The gravity here pressed even harder than at the palace, yet Ryan moved with focused efficiency. His lighter frame allowed him to dart between collapsed structures where larger warriors struggled for footing. Empress Thalor had personally led the relief force, her towering form cutting an imposing figure as she directed the defense from the central command post. Reports flooded in showing the swarms adapting. They bypassed heavy fortifications by tunneling beneath them or overwhelming positions through sheer numbers. Korath fought at the front line, his massive fists and energy gauntlets smashing through clusters of attackers, but even he was beginning to show signs of strain as the creatures learned to swarm in coordinated patterns. Ryan had been assigned to a support role, yet he quickly found himself in the thick of the fighting when a section of the wall collapsed under a concentrated breach. Without hesitation, he grabbed a fallen energy lance and moved into the gap. His smaller size let him slip through narrow fissures in the rubble, striking at vulnerable joints in the swarm creature's armor that the Thalorians' heavier weapons could not easily target. Each precise thrust found its mark, dropping attackers that had shrugged off direct hits from larger warriors. A squad of Thalorian soldiers watched in astonishment as the human cleared a path, allowing reinforcements to push forward and seal the breach. "He moves like a shadow in the ruins," one soldier muttered, voice filled with newfound awe. Word spread rapidly along the defensive lines. Warriors who had once dismissed Ryan now called for his assistance in tight corridors and collapsed tunnels where only he could navigate. He coordinated small teams, teaching them quick adjustments to their fighting style, using terrain for ambushes, targeting weak points rather than trading blows, and maintaining formation even when outnumbered. The Empress observed these shifts from her command position, her crimson eyes narrowing as she noted how the human's presence was changing the flow of battle. During a brief lull in the fighting, she summoned him to the command post. Ryan arrived covered in dust and ichor, breathing heavily but standing tall. "Your tactics are proving effective where brute force alone fails," Vera said, her voice carrying both respect and calculation. "Explain how your kind learned to fight this way." Ryan wiped sweat from his face and replied steadily, We come from a world that was never kind to the weak. We learned early that survival often depends on working with what we have, rather than wishing for what we lack. Size is only one factor. Will and adaptability are others. The Empress listened intently, then assigned him a more active role in planning the next counterpush. As night fell across the outpost, the swarms launched their heaviest assault yet. Thousands of creatures surged forward under cover of darkness, their bioluminescent markings creating an eerie, shifting glow across the battlefield. Ryan found himself leading a small, mixed unit of Thalorian volunteers through a series of underground service tunnels. His knowledge of structural engineering helped them predict where the enemy might breach next, allowing the team to set up devastating ambushes. In one tight passage, when a swarm cluster broke through, Ryan directed the soldiers to hold position while he climbed a narrow ventilation shaft. From above, he dropped precise charges that collapsed the tunnel section on the attackers, buying precious time for the main line to reinforce. Korath joined the effort later, fighting side by side with Ryan in a brutal, close-quarters clash. The champion's raw power combined with the human's agility created a deadly synergy that turned the tide in their sector. As they stood back to back against a fresh wave, Korath growled, "You are small, but your heart fights like a giant. I see now why the Empress watches you so closely." Ryan managed a tired grin. "We all have our strengths. Today we combine them." The battle raged through the night and into the following day. Ryan moved constantly between positions, repairing damaged equipment on the fly, rerouting power lines in spaces too confined for others, and offering calm guidance when morale began to waver. His presence had a steadying effect. Soldiers who had laughed at his size in the palace now looked to him for direction in the chaos. The Empress herself entered the fray when a critical generator station came under direct threat. She fought with regal fury, but even her immense strength began to tire against the endless swarm. Ryan spotted the danger and rushed to her side, guiding her through a narrow maintenance corridor that allowed them to flank the attackers. Together they dismantled the leading edge of the assault, the humans' quick thinking compensating for the physical differences. By the time the second dawn broke, the outpost still stood, though badly damaged. The swarms withdrew temporarily, leaving behind a field littered with fallen creatures. Exhausted defenders cheered as the last attackers were driven off. The Empress stood among her warriors, her silver skin streaked with battle marks, and publicly acknowledged Ryan's contributions. "This human has shown us that true strength is not measured only in height or muscle. Today we owe part of our survival to his courage and cleverness." The words carried across the assembled troops, cementing a shift in perception that no arena victory could have achieved alone. In the aftermath, as repair crews began their work, Ryan found quiet moments to reflect. The gravity still weighed on him, his muscles aching from the prolonged effort, yet he felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He had come to this empire as an outsider, small and underestimated, and had proven his worth under the harshest conditions. Korath approached him later, offering a massive hand in a gesture of respect. "You defeated me once with skill. Today you fought beside me as an equal. The Empire will remember this." Ryan clasped the offered hand as best he could. "Then let us continue fighting together. The swarms will return, and we will be ready." The Empress watched the exchange from a distance, her thoughts clearly turning toward larger strategic implications. The small human had not only survived the battle, but had elevated the entire defense through his actions. Reports from other outposts were already arriving, speaking of similar threats and the need for new approaches. Ryan knew the real war was far from over, but the foundation for a genuine alliance had been laid in blood and sweat on this battered frontier. As the relief ships arrived to bolster the outpost, he prepared himself for the next phase. The journey back toward the core worlds would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that humanity's value extended far beyond physical size. The Empress had seen him defeat her champion barehanded, but it was on this battlefield that she truly began to understand the depth of what the small humans could offer her empire. The return journey to the imperial capital took several days aboard the flagship, giving the warriors time to recover from the brutal defense of the frontier outpost. Ryan Brooks spent much of the voyage in the engineering sections, working alongside Thalorian technicians to repair damaged systems and improve efficiency where his smaller hands could access delicate components. The gravity aboard the ship remained heavy, pressing on his frame, but he had grown more accustomed to it. He moved with a steady determination that earned quiet nods of approval from the crew. Word of his actions at the outpost had spread throughout the fleet, transforming the initial Mockery into stories of the human who turned the tide in impossible conditions. On the third day, Empress Vera summoned him to her private strategy chamber. The room was dimly lit by holographic displays, showing the expanding threat of the void swarms across multiple sectors. She stood tall before the projections, her crimson eyes reflecting the shifting tactical maps. "Your contributions at the outpost have not gone unnoticed, Ryan Brooks," she said, her voice carrying a new weight of consideration. "Many of my generals now speak of adapting our doctrines to incorporate the flexibility you demonstrated." Ryan stood straight, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I only did what was necessary, Your Majesty. Humans have faced overwhelming odds before and learned that survival often comes from working smarter alongside strength, not against it." The Empress gestured to the displays, highlighting several vulnerable border worlds. "The swarms are evolving. They learn from each encounter, adapting faster than our traditional methods can counter. Your suggestions for layered defenses and rapid repositioning have already proven valuable in simulations." They spent hours reviewing plans. Ryan offered insights drawn from Earth's history of asymmetric warfare and engineering ingenuity under pressure. The Empress listened carefully, occasionally challenging his ideas, but more often incorporating them into the evolving strategy. By the end of the session, she had assigned him a formal advisory position within the Imperial War Council, a role that carried real influence for the first time. Back among the troops, Ryan noticed the shift in attitude was deepening. Warriors who had once towered over him with dismissive glances now sought his opinion on equipment modifications and tactical adjustments. Korath, the former champion, trained with him in the ship's combat bays, combining raw power with the human's agile techniques to develop new joint maneuvers. "You make me rethink what it means to be a warrior," Korath admitted during one session, his massive frame glistening with effort. "Size no longer seems the only measure." Ryan smiled faintly as he demonstrated a leverage throw that used the opponent's momentum. "We all bring different tools to the fight. The key is learning how to use them together." As the flagship approached the capital, news arrived of fresh swarm incursions closer to the core worlds. The Empress called an emergency session of the High Command, with Ryan seated at the table among the Empire's most senior leaders. The discussions were intense. Traditionalists argued for overwhelming frontal assaults, while younger officers pushed for the more adaptive approaches Ryan had helped pioneer. The Empress moderated the debate, her crimson eyes frequently turning toward the human for input. Ryan spoke clearly and respectfully, emphasizing the need for hybrid tactics that combined Thalorian might with human creativity and endurance. His words carried the weight of proven results from the outpost, silencing many skeptics. Upon landing at the capital, a formal ceremony was held to honor the defenders of the frontier. Ryan stood on the grand platform beside Korath and other heroes. The crowds cheered as the Empress presented awards for valor. When it came time to recognize the human's role, Vera spoke directly to the assembled throng. "This warrior from a small world faced our champion and prevailed through skill alone. On the frontier he stood with us against the void and helped turn back the darkness. Let no one here underestimate the strength that can reside in unexpected forms." The applause that followed was genuine and thunderous, marking a public turning point in how the Empire viewed humanity. In the days that followed, Ryan's advisory duties expanded. He worked long hours refining defense networks across multiple systems, often crawling into tight access panels that no Thalorian could reach, rerouting systems and strengthening weak points with innovative solutions. His quarters in the palace were upgraded to better suit his needs, though he still found the ceilings comically high and the furniture oversized. Evenings brought quieter moments, when the Empress would invite him for walks in the gardens. She shared stories of her empire's long history of conquest and optimization, while Ryan spoke of humanity's journey from fragile beginnings to reaching the stars through persistence and ingenuity. These conversations deepened the bond between them, moving beyond politics into mutual respect. One night, as they stood beneath the stars, Vera asked him directly, "Do you resent being called small by my people?" Ryan considered the question before answering. "At first it stung, but I have learned that words only define you if you let them. My people have always been underestimated. It has never stopped us from achieving what matters." The Empress nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "You have shown my empire a truth we had forgotten. Strength is not solely in size or numbers, but in the will to adapt and endure." As new reports of swarm activity continued to arrive, the War Council intensified its preparations. Ryan found himself at the center of planning sessions, his ideas shaping the Empire's response in ways that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. Korath had become a close ally. The two trained together and developed tactics that blended their very different strengths into something greater. The palace buzzed with a new energy, a blend of traditional Thalorian pride and the fresh perspective the human had introduced. Ryan felt the weight of responsibility, but also a quiet pride in representing his world. He knew the swarms would not relent, and greater battles lay ahead. Yet the foundation of alliance was now solid. The Empress had seen him defeat her champion barehanded, witnessed his courage on the frontier, and now recognized the deeper value humanity could bring to the alliance. The coming challenges would test them all, but with the foundations of trust and cooperation now firmly established, Ryan believed they could face whatever the void threw at them. The Empire was changing, one adaptive tactic and one act of quiet courage at a time, and the small human from Earth stood at the heart of that transformation. The war room deep within the Imperial Palace pulsed with urgent activity. Holographic displays showed the void swarms massing for what appeared to be their largest coordinated assault yet. Ryan Brooks stood at the central table, surrounded by the Empire's top generals and strategic advisors. His smaller frame no longer drew dismissive glances, but instead commanded focused attention. Empress Vera Thalor presided over the meeting, her crimson eyes sharp as she reviewed the latest intelligence. The swarms had breached several outer systems and were now converging toward a cluster of vital core worlds, threatening the heart of the Thalorian Empire. Traditional plans called for direct confrontation with overwhelming force. Ryan's voice carried significant weight as he proposed a layered defense strategy that combined heavy fortifications with mobile strike teams and adaptive engineering solutions. "We cannot simply meet them head-on," he explained calmly. "We use the terrain, create kill zones, and strike at their coordination nodes. Humans have defended against superior numbers by turning the battlefield into a trap rather than a fair fight." The generals debated fiercely, but the Empress ultimately approved a hybrid plan that incorporated Ryan's recommendations. In the following days, Ryan threw himself into the preparations, working alongside engineering crews to modify defensive installations. His ability to access tight spaces allowed rapid upgrades to sensor arrays and power relays that had previously been neglected due to their inaccessibility. Korath led the elite strike teams, integrating the new tactics that blended Thalorian power with human agility and timing. The two trained relentlessly, developing combination maneuvers where Ryan's precise strikes created openings for the champion's devastating follow-ups. As the swarm fleet approached, tension across the capital reached a peak. The Empress addressed the assembled forces in a stirring speech, highlighting the unity between her people and their new allies. She specifically acknowledged Ryan's role in reshaping their approach to war. "The human who once stood small before my champion now stands as proof that true strength transcends physical form. Today we fight not as separate peoples, but as one force strengthened by shared wisdom." Ryan felt a swell of pride as the warriors cheered. Many turned to offer him nods of respect. The battle for the core worlds began at dawn, when the first swarm waves emerged from rift space. Ryan was positioned with a rapid response unit near a critical energy nexus. When the creatures breached the outer defenses, he moved swiftly through maintenance tunnels, rerouting power to reinforce shield generators, while directing ground teams to collapse tunnels on advancing hordes. His calm instructions cut through the chaos, helping the defenders hold key positions longer than expected. Korath's strike team executed a daring counter-assault, using the new tactics to disrupt the swarm's command signals. Ryan joined them for the final push, slipping through a narrow breach to plant disruption charges that threw the enemy into disarray. The combination of raw Thalorian might and human ingenuity turned what could have been a rout into a hard-fought stalemate. Hours stretched into a grueling day of continuous fighting. Ryan's muscles burned under the heavy gravity, but he pushed through, his endurance surprising even the seasoned warriors around him. At one critical moment, when a swarm breakthrough threatened to overwhelm the Empress's command position, Ryan led a small team through a collapsed corridor. They emerged behind the enemy lines, striking at vulnerable nerve clusters and buying precious time for reinforcements to arrive. The Empress fought at the forefront, her presence inspiring the troops, but it was Ryan's quick thinking that prevented a total collapse. As the first wave receded, exhausted defenders took stock. Casualties were heavy, but the core worlds still held. Reports flooded in praising the effectiveness of the new hybrid tactics. In the command center, the Empress approached Ryan, placing a massive hand on his shoulder with surprising gentleness. "You have done more than prove your worth today. You have helped save my empire." Ryan looked up at her towering form and replied quietly, "We stood together. That is what matters." In the days that followed the battle, the palace became a hub of strategic re-evaluation. Ryan's advisory role expanded further as the Empire began integrating human-style training programs across its forces. He worked closely with Korath to establish joint academies where warriors learned to combine strength with adaptability. The once mocking nobles now sought his counsel, and stories of the small human who defeated the champion and turned the tide of war spread across the empire. Evenings brought reflective conversations with the Empress in the quiet gardens. She spoke openly about how her people had grown complacent in their physical superiority, and how Ryan's presence had reminded them of forgotten virtues like ingenuity and resilience. Ryan shared more about Earth's history, the struggles and triumphs that had shaped humanity into a species that refused to be defined by limitations. One evening, as they watched the stars, Vera asked him if he missed his homeworld. Ryan nodded thoughtfully. "Every day, but I came here to build something greater than myself. Seeing this alliance take shape makes every challenge worthwhile." The threat from the void was far from over, with intelligence suggesting even larger swarms gathering beyond the rim. Yet the Empire stood stronger, its warriors more versatile, and its leadership more open to new ideas. Ryan continued his work with quiet dedication, modifying equipment, training teams, and contributing to long-term defense strategies. Korath had become not just an ally but a true friend. The two often shared meals and swapped stories of past battles. The champion frequently joked that Ryan had taught him humility, while Ryan credited Korath with showing him the true potential of combined strength. As preparations intensified for the next major campaign, Ryan felt a deep sense of purpose. He had arrived as a small representative from a small world, mocked for his size and underestimated at every turn. Now he walked the halls of power as a respected advisor, whose ideas shaped the fate of an empire. The Empress had witnessed his barehanded victory over her champion, seen his courage on the battlefield, and recognized the profound value humanity brought to the alliance. The coming challenges would test them all, but with the foundations of trust and cooperation now firmly established, Ryan believed they could face whatever the void threw at them. The Empire was changing, embracing a broader definition of strength that included the cleverness and endurance of its smallest allies. And at the center of that transformation stood the human who had refused to let his size define his destiny. The final decisive battle unfolded across the shattered remnants of the frontier sector. The largest Void Swarm armada yet had gathered to strike at the heart of the Thalorian Empire. Ryan Brooks moved through the chaos of the command nexus with practiced calm. His smaller stature allowed him to navigate the crowded tactical stations where towering warriors coordinated the Empire's response. Holographic displays flickered with urgent data as wave after wave of chitinous horrors poured from spatial rifts. Their numbers seemed endless. Empress Vera Thalor stood at the center of it all, issuing commands with regal authority, while her crimson eyes frequently sought out Ryan for confirmation on adaptive maneuvers. The hybrid strategy they had developed together was now being put to the ultimate test. It blended Thalorian overwhelming force with human ingenuity in layered defenses and precision strikes. Korath led the elite vanguard, his massive frame cutting through the swarm like a living weapon. Yet it was the coordinated support from Ryan's engineering teams that kept the defensive lines from collapsing. Ryan had spent the previous weeks modifying key relay stations, creating hidden access points only he and specially trained small units could reach. These allowed rapid power shifts and surprise disruptions that threw the swarm's coordination into disarray at critical moments. As the battle intensified, a major breach occurred near the primary shield generator complex. Ryan immediately volunteered to lead a repair team through the narrow service conduits beneath the battlefield. The gravity was punishing, pressing down on every breath, yet he pressed forward. His hands worked swiftly to reroute failing systems while directing larger warriors to hold the perimeter above. Explosions rocked the ground as swarm creatures attempted to flood the tunnels. Ryan's team held firm, using tight-space tactics he had taught them to turn the confined area into a deadly trap. Word of his efforts reached the Empress through the comm network, and she personally acknowledged the contribution, boosting morale across the embattled forces. Hours blurred into a relentless struggle. Ryan emerged from the tunnels covered in dust and residue, joining Korath for a desperate counterpush against a particularly aggressive swarm cluster threatening the command post. Together they executed a perfected combination maneuver. Ryan's agile strikes created openings that the champion exploited with crushing force. The synergy between them had become legendary among the troops, symbolizing the new era of alliance between their peoples. The Empress watched the display from her position. A rare smile touched her features as she saw the small human fighting with unyielding resolve beside her greatest warrior. As the tide slowly began to turn, the swarm's central command node became vulnerable. Ryan proposed a high-risk insertion plan and volunteered to lead a small strike team through a collapsed structure to plant a disruption core directly into the node. The Empress approved without hesitation, her trust in him now absolute. "Go with the strength of both our peoples," she said, her voice carrying across the command channel. Ryan and his team moved with precision born of hard-won experience. In the narrow ruins, his size proved the decisive advantage, allowing him to reach the target where no Thalorian could fit. With steady hands, he armed the device, then fought his way back through emerging swarm creatures, using every lesson from previous battles to survive. The explosion that followed shattered the swarm's coordination, sending the remaining forces into panicked retreat as Imperial fleets closed in for the final cleanup. Victory declarations echoed across the comms as the last rifts sealed and the void forces scattered. The battlefield fell into an exhausted silence, broken only by the cheers of surviving warriors. The Empress descended to the field personally, her towering form moving among the troops as she offered words of gratitude. When she reached Ryan, she knelt to bring her face level with his, a gesture of profound respect that silenced the surrounding celebrations for a moment. "You have rewritten what strength means for my empire, Ryan Brooks. The human who was once asked why he was so small has become the one who helped save us all." Ryan met her crimson gaze with quiet pride. "We stood together as equals. That is the real victory." In the weeks that followed the battle, the Thalorian Empire entered a new golden age of cooperation. Joint academies were established across the core worlds, training warriors in the blended tactics that had proven so effective. Ryan was offered a permanent position as senior advisor to the Empress, a role he accepted with the understanding that he would also serve as a bridge between humanity and the Empire. Korath became his closest companion. The two often shared stories and continued to refine their joint techniques for future threats. The once mocking court now celebrated the human's contributions, with nobles and generals alike seeking his counsel on matters of defense and innovation. Evenings in the imperial gardens became a cherished routine, where the Empress and Ryan would discuss the future of the Alliance and the broader galaxy. She spoke of how his presence had reminded her people that true power lay not only in physical dominance, but in adaptability, endurance, and the courage to embrace new ideas. Ryan shared visions of expanded trade and cultural exchange, where humans and Thalorians could learn from each other's strengths for generations to come. One quiet night under the stars, as they reflected on the long journey from that first mocking question in the throne room to this hard-won peace, the Empress placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You came to us small in form but great in spirit. The Empire will never forget what you have given us." Ryan smiled, feeling the weight of the moment. "And I will always remember the day an empire learned that size is no measure of a warrior's heart." Across the reclaimed sectors, new stories spread of the human who had defeated the champion barehanded, and then helped turn back the darkness that threatened to consume everything. Young Thalorians trained with renewed purpose, inspired by tales of how one small outsider had changed the course of history. Ryan continued his work with the same steady dedication that had defined him from the beginning, overseeing engineering projects, mentoring new recruits, and strengthening the bonds of the Alliance. He knew greater challenges might still lie ahead in the vast galaxy, but with the Empire and humanity standing united, he faced the future with confidence. The small human from Earth had not only earned his place among giants, but had helped them see the universe through new eyes. In the end, it was never about proving he was bigger or stronger in the traditional sense. It was about showing that courage, cleverness, and the willingness to stand together could overcome any darkness. The Thalorian Empire had found an unexpected ally in the unlikeliest of places, and the galaxy would long remember how a single question about size had led to the birth of a partnership that would endure for ages.